Folks, I didn't do an episode last week, but I am back this week, and boy, is there a lot to talk about. The city of Cincinnati is on fire right now, so is Columbus, and so is Cleveland when it comes to all the sports teams. I'll be talking about it right here on Buckeye Sports Breakdown, a show about teams from the great state of Ohio. Hello, everyone. I'm Mahir Sinhasan, your host, and thanks for tuning in. We've got a lot to get to, including a lot of baseball action, so let's get to it. Now, the quick hits for today is pretty simple, and it's just catching you up on the All-Star Voting, which has happened recently. Phase one has ended. That is, all of the teams, or rather, all of the voters can look at the different players and see who they want to be represented in the All-Star game. Phase one has now ended, and now phase two will start very soon. Now, phase two is in essence two players from each position, one for each league, and there are currently two players that have gotten an automatic bid, one for the AL, one for the NL. Shohei Ohtani got it for the American League. Ronald Acuna Jr. got it for the National League. When you look at phase two, as I mentioned before, two players per position for each league. Not looking good for the Ohio teams. The Cleveland Guardians had nobody making it. Same went for the Cincinnati Reds as well. You look at the teams that were represented in that phase two, or rather will be represented in the phase two section. You're looking at the Rangers, the Yankees, the Angels, and the Rays representing in the AL, a majority of it, that is. And then in the NL, a lot of Dodgers and a lot of Braves players as well. A few players also here and there, like Bryce Harper, who's having a good season. He made it to phase two. Same went for Luis Arias, who is having one of the best, if not the best, slugging average this year. Now, those teams are all good. But here's one thing the Rangers, Yankees, Angels, Rays, Dodgers, and Braves cannot say right now. And that's the fact that Ohio has the best team, or rather, they have the hottest team in baseball. The Cincinnati Reds. It's been a while since I've talked last time, but boy, has it been electric. They went on the road. It was a 9-game road trip, went 8-1, including winning the last 8 games, swept the Rockies earlier this week, and now they have an 11-game win streak. That is the longest in franchise history since 1957, which dates back to 12. I did some research on what happened back in 1957 with Cincinnati. It's been a long time. I mean, almost, or rather more than 65 years ago, back when the Reds were at Crosley Field. They were 80-74 that year, so a little bit above 500, kind of similar to how the Reds are now. They were 4th out of the 8th teams in the National League, but they did not make the playoffs. The only postseason back then was the World Series, where the top team in the American League would face the top team in the National League. But how have they been playing? Pretty good. Really, really good right now. I mean, I talked about it a few weeks ago when they hosted the Brewers and Dodgers about the electricity and the fact that it's really increased, especially after calling up Elly De La Cruz. This team's only lost twice since calling up Elly, which I think it's amazing. But don't get me wrong, this team goes beyond Elly De La Cruz. But looking at the team itself, 24 wins, approximately 65% of them have been off comebacks. 24 comeback wins this year, which I think is very surprising. And I think what's even more surprising is as this win streak goes along, the wins get even better. Take the Astros series, for example. It's restored confidence to this team that they can go forward. They can come back, even being down by like 3, as it was in that game 3 against the Astros. It doesn't matter where this team sits. They always find a way to swing momentum in their favor, which is something so contradictory to how the Reds have played, and even, I mean, up until the last couple years or so, contradictory to how Cincinnati sports have been. It's flabbergasting to me. But you know and you understand that this is something that the Reds front office, yes, it's surprising. Yes, the fans are on board. Yes, the Reds Live section and setup is absolutely electric after every win. But it goes back to what Nick Kroll talked about. Humble, hungry, and smart. That's the recipe for the front office. And it shows what this team can be, and it shows what the players can be as well. Nick Kroll and crew, when they kind of made this mantra, humble, hungry, smart, they knew they wanted players in that sector. maybe some guys that didn't get a lot of pop, a lot of prospect in college, but they're still good players. They're still guys that the Reds can rely on, and they're always trying to push forward. I think that's the other thing you understand with the Reds is like, yes, Ellie De La Cruz is a great prospect. He was the number one prospect in the Reds farm, but he was the number four prospect in the farm system when drafted. He was not number one. And I think that's, an incredible stat to point out to this team. And it seems like the lineup just gets better at every turn. I mean, you think about it, you have a great rookie in Spencer Steer coming up. Jake Fraley is able to really show his talents. Then you look at guys like Tyler Stevenson, Jonathan India, who are getting out of sophomore slumps and playing really spectacular baseball, if you will. Then you start building on, you get Matt McLean in May, you get Ellie in June, and now you have Joey Votto back. Granted, he's not in the number three spot, which he's held for almost a decade now, but it's almost veteran confidence in this team. It's almost weird when you look at the mantra of this team that it's a bunch of young guys who are fast, they're fun, they're humble, hungry, smart, as Nick Kroll put it. But then you look at a guy like Joey Votto, who's been there through the tough times, and I think he understands the experience and something that I think he wants to buy into. He talked about this in his presser before the game on a Monday, which was his first game back. He said, quote, "It feels like I've been called up, like it's 2007 all over again," end quote. Just really good. The depth of this team is amazing. I mean, the fact that, I thought about this last week. I was like, it's really great. The top of the lineup is stellar, absolutely stellar. I mean, pick or choose who you want in the leadoff spot. It could be Jake Fraley, Will Benson, TJ Friedl, all great guys. But then you have Matt McLean second, Jonathan India third, Ellie De La Cruz fourth, and that's a deadly combo. But then I was like, after Spencer Steer comes to the plate in fifth, you realize that the roster goes down. Not really now. Joey Votto and crew are starting to stabilize that bottom part of the lineup, and I really enjoy that because when you look at the teams, and especially when you look at the teams like the Dodgers and the Braves, teams that are especially showing out, right? Even the Braves, too. I mean, you got Arcia and Harris who are in the back part of their lineup, but they're still getting all-star nods. They're getting the votes and they're getting onto phase two. And it might be a good testament of what we see this weekend between these two sides. But overall, a lot to say, and it's all good things to say about the Reds for now. And I talked about the depth. It will be interesting to see what the front office does July 31st. Do you kick someone out? Do you bring someone in? I mean, the Reds have said that they do want to bring some star players in, maybe get a little bit of that payroll to say, you know what, maybe this year or maybe next year is a chance that they can make a push towards the World Series, which I think is absolutely amazing and almost reframes what this team can be going into October, where it's not just you make the playoffs. Do you make a run in the playoffs? Do you go to the World Series? Do you win the World Series and give Cincinnati its first title since 1990? There's a lot of questions this front office is asking, and the way this is turned around, I've got nothing but good things to say. Now, looking towards the future, this week, we'll see if this Reds team can, one, hold on to this NL Central lead. They've got a game and a half games ahead of Milwaukee, who will be on the road at Cleveland this weekend. More on that later. And number two, as I noted earlier, can they be contender for the World Series and be humble, hungry, smart, and also help with this confidence? Because it's one thing to sweep the Royals on the road and to sweep the Rockies, even the Astros, although the Astros have not been the team that we saw last year. It's another thing to host the hottest team in the National League right now, and you can say, hey, we're playing really good ball right now, and we think that this is the chance that we can really say to ourselves, this is a team that can go the distance. And I think to that extent, and I think knowing the Braves caliber, I mean, I watched their game against the Phillies yesterday, just really good stuff. I mean, throughout the entire lineup, I mean, yes, you have Osuna, yes, you have Acuna, and a lot of people are giving them credit, but Austin Riley, really good. Even towards the back, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, Arcia and Harris can almost have as much firepower, if not more, in key situations. And we saw notes of it, or rather, I saw notes of it yesterday when they played the Phillies. Even when the Phillies had Aaron Nola on the mound, the Braves were able to respond. They were able to get a command of the game, even in the regular innings. And then by the time extra innings came along, they were able to take full command. They win the game by a sizable margin, which I think is really good. I think the other thing to note too, we talked about the Reds being the hottest team in baseball with an 11-game win streak. How about the Braves? They've got an 8-game win streak right now and a great group of pitchers as well. On Friday, or rather tonight, you got Smith-Shawver going up against Weaver. Saturday, they've got Schuster. The Reds have not decided who they are going to start yet, which is a little concerning, especially knowing that a few pitchers have gone to the IL, including Hunter Green. So it will be interesting to see who the Reds put out there. Maybe someone from the farm system. That would be a little risky, though. Although Schuster's not the best pitcher in the cabinet for the Braves, but still a little bit concerning. But nonetheless, a great matchup on Sunday. The Reds have Lively out there. The Braves will have Morton. So it should be a good series overall. I definitely see this as a benchmark. First off, and it's almost like you can break this series down almost into a story of how the Reds can play the rest of this year. When I talk about that, if they get swept, you're going to get a little concerned. You're going to be like, well, this team could make the playoffs as a wild card, but when it comes to playing the top teams like the Braves, who in my opinion will be the number one seed in the NL come playoff time, it's a question of can you play with them? And the answer is no. If you take a game from it, it's solid. It's definitely solid where you can say, yes, there is a competitiveness spirit to it, but there's some things that need to be ironed out. And I think the Reds do understand that, especially after that Rockies series where every first inning, the Reds gave up a run to Colorado. If you take two, I think you have a similar feeling to how the Dodgers series went, where you are just banging on the tables, you're happy, and everybody's singing. Everybody's joyous. Everybody's chanting for these players' names. It's what you want to build out of a winning culture. And I think knowing how the Braves played in the NLDS last year against the Phillies, this is a team, the Braves that is, that can succumb to teams like the Reds trying to eye and maybe pulling off the upset come playoff time. If you sweep, I don't know what to say. I mean, this is almost like Moneyball stuff right here, where they had a longer winning streak. Don't get me wrong, but if this team can really show their caliber and sweep the Braves, I think it's safe to say this team is maybe top one or top two in terms of NL teams to win the World Series. You heard me right. You heard me right. I'll make that assumption right there and then. It really shows. And hopefully the crowd plays a big factor in this weekend as well. Charlie Clifford for WLWT reported on this today, but Friday and Saturday's games are sold out, save for standing room only tickets that are $25. $25, which I think is absolutely insane. I mean, the cheapest ticket you can get at Great American Ballpark is around $5, and that's like outer view level tickets. View level tickets are about maybe $10, $12 from what I check on the Reds website. To get standing room only tickets, $25. That's amazing. And it's just, it feels different. It hits different for this team. Yes, they were packed when they hosted the Yankees. They had a sold out crowd, actually, one of those days when the Yankees came to town. But you think about it, a good 40-50% of those fans were dressing up for the Bronx Bombers and not for the Cincinnati Reds. And then there was another sold out game, and that was when they hosted the Brewers. But the Zach Brown Band concert was right after it. It was a charity concert too. Great atmosphere. I wasn't there, but I did see some photos and videos of it. Great job, great work. This feels different. This is the Reds' occasion. This is the Reds' week to really show what they've got in this division, what they've got in this league, what they showed to MLB. I mean, people are saying, oh, it's the hottest team in baseball. It's America's team. You have got probably the best series in the league this weekend at your home stadium in front of a sold-out crowd. Simply put, there's only one thing to do: finish and win. Now, when you look at the weekday series, that's going to be on the road against Baltimore. And I've talked about the AL East before and how they are basically ravaging almost everyone in the league, especially in the AL, when it comes to getting results. And yes, the Baltimore Orioles are not in contention to get the AL East. I mean, the Rays are absolutely slaughtering everyone right now. Didn't do it last night against the Royals, much to my dismay, but nonetheless, it is interesting to see this Orioles side, and it's what the league, I think, especially what the fans want, right? A Cincinnati Reds side that has not made the playoffs, that is the traditional playoff format, not including 2020, in 10 years, 2013. And the Orioles, who have also not been in the playoffs for quite a while, and two teams that for a very long time were basement dwellers in their respective divisions. And both of these teams have a chance to make the playoffs. There's a hope. There's an energy running through Baltimore, which is very similar to Cincinnati right now. It's going to be a very interesting series on how that plays out. Again, when you look at like, I think about it from this perspective, and again, like if you understand East Side West Side thing, you probably get what I'm saying. But there's like the old money and the new money, right? Where it's like you've got the teams that are always going to be classics. You know, in the AL, it's guys like the Yankees and the Astros, and then there's new money teams like the Orioles who are playing very good, the Rays who are shocking a lot of people this year and playing exceptional. Similarly, in the NL, they've got the same thing where you've got those old money type teams like the Dodgers and the Braves. And meanwhile, on the other side, you've got teams like the Reds. You can even count others too, like the Marlins could be a wild card team. The Giants are starting to get back on their high horse as well. You know, there's a lot of teams out there where you can say this is where this team can take the next step. And I think for the Reds too, similarly with the Braves, where it's almost like old money, new money, it's almost new money against Baltimore, kind of team supporting each other, which I think should be absolutely amazing. But I would definitely want the Reds to win that. If they can win that, if they can get another series win, I think this team's for real. They are definitely for real. All right. Now taking a look at the Cleveland Guardians. It's been a while since I've really dove into what this team has done. And again, you may remember a couple weeks ago, my last episode, where I kind of talked about them in passing. Obviously, there was a lot of news in Cincinnati, both with FC Cincinnati and then with the Reds too, with Ellie De La Cruz being called up. But it's been a while since the Guardians have been featured here on Buckeye Sports Breakdown. And I do want to give them some credit. Yes, the AL Central has been not the cream of the crop, anything but the cream of the crop when it comes to MLB this year. But the Guardians are 36 and 38, but don't let that record surprise you. They're one game behind the Minnesota Twins for the AL Central crown. And it is interesting to see the types of opponents they are playing this weekend. The Guards will be hosting the Brewers. The Twins will be on the road at the Tigers. Now, the Guardians have played pretty solid as well. 7-5 since I talked last week, or rather 2 weeks ago. They went 2-1 at home against the Astros, 1-2 on the road against the Padres and the Diamondbacks. And then they swept the A's at home earlier in the week. And that too, in the A's series, they were down going into the seventh, eighth, ninth inning, or rather, they were down in the fifth inning on Thursday, and they were able to come back. And then it was later in the stretch when you look at Tuesday and Wednesday's games. But it's basically what I've talked about with the Guards this entire year, where the later you go in the game, the better this team plays. And yes, they did play the Oakland Athletics. Yes, the A's have a lot of problems going on, and they are the worst team in MLB. But this is a team that deserves a lot of respect. They split a series with the Rays. They were able to go to Milwaukee and swept the Brewers on the road. Yes, they haven't gotten the ideal results, but they've showed it when it's mattered. And I mean, they were close a lot of times to possibly really showing their caliber and taking one on the road against Cleveland. So a lot goes to what the A's are doing. But back to Cleveland, just late game play overall. And I think the other thing is especially how this team plays with the new schedule where you're playing almost every team. I think every team in Major League Baseball this year, where it's entirely different from what we've seen. The National League games are definitely interesting and almost piquing me in terms of how the Guardians have played. Yes, you go 1-2 against the Padres and Diamondbacks, both of them very solid teams. But especially from where they are in the AL Central, and the AL Central is just getting beaten upon by almost every division right now. it is a good sign where you can go on the road, mind you, to San Diego, to Phoenix, which are tough road trips for anybody that is out in the Midwest or on the East Coast, and get those results where it matters. Really great play overall. It will be interesting to see what this team can do this weekend. Back to the A's series, though. I talked about the rallies, and this is what I really want to know. Naylor, Kwan, Straw, Bell, and Jimenez all had tying or go-ahead runs in that series. If you will, about 5 of maybe your 9 to 10 players that are pretty consistent. And it's great to see almost the depth and rotation of this team really showing out. I talked about this with the Reds, but even the Guardians too. I mean, I was even thinking about it earlier this year where I was like, this team is good, but are they really going to repeat as AL Central champions? I mean, hey, they keep it up, they sweep, or at the very least, they get a victory, at least a series victory against the Brewers. You are looking at maybe this team does have the confidence to repeat as AL Central champions. And we'll see it this weekend against the Brewers at home. Yes, they have a chance to do themselves, and the Reds are solid in that way. The Reds are up a game and a half on the Brewers, so if the Reds can take care of the Braves and the Guardians can take care of the Brewers, it can make things really interesting in the NL Central and give the Reds a good leg up. But nonetheless, back to the neighbors up north, or rather the team on the end of I-71 in Cleveland. They've got a good set of pitchers on the mound, and I'm not blaming them. It's really good. Bieber, Bybee, and Seivale, they all have a chance to make a statement too. I mean, knowing that the Twins are playing Detroit, and the Twins, yes, they are on top of the division, but they have struggled against in-division play this year. They hosted the Red Sox earlier this week. They went 2-2. Hosted the Tigers last week at home. They went 2-2 in that series. So when you look at it, it is interesting to see what this team can do. And again, the Brewers are almost in an enigma where yes, you have the Reds soaring, you have the Cubs soaring. They're also getting results too. And the Cardinals are on the lowdown. So are the Pirates. So are the Brewers. Obviously, the Brewers I don't think are as bad as the Pirates, but it's still not good. Yes, they got something. They got the series win against Pittsburgh, but you followed up with a 2-1 series loss against the Diamondbacks. And that's a little concerning, especially knowing the fact that a lot of these games were very close. Yes, they were able to come back in that second game, but the third game, they let the Diamondbacks take care of business and not much of an answer to it. Even when you got a guy like Julio Teheran on the mound, who's a really good pitcher. I haven't heard his name in a while, so it was good to see him play. But when you look at what the Brewers have done, it is interesting to see what they can do for the future, what they can do now. Obviously, they'll have Wade Miley on the mound in Cleveland, and he knows a thing or two about pitching a no-hitter up there. Take a look at when he was with the Reds in 2021. But you can definitely see that if there is a chance when it comes to streaks, teams going up, teams going down, the Guardians have themselves, or rather, they have the opportunity to present themselves with a really, really, really good streak. I mean, they swept the A's. They won that last game against the Diamondbacks. They're on a 4-game winning streak right now. You got a chance to maybe get 5 or 6 this weekend, and in my opinion, they take it. Well, I talked about how Cincinnati is on fire right now, and it's not just because of the Reds. FC Cincinnati remains the best team in MLS and will still crank out victories even with a bunch of starters out. Welcome back to Buckeye Sports Breakdown. I'm Mahir Hassan, and let's take a look at what the Orange and Blue have done recently. Now, granted, since my past show a couple weeks ago, they did play the day after, that is June 10th, against Vancouver on the road, got a 1-1 draw, but they did get an 11-day break. They were back on Wednesday hosting Toronto FC. As I mentioned, though, 6 starters out, and a lot of them for various reasons. Of course, Brandon Vasquez and Matt Miazga will be in the United States roster for the Gold Cup coming up. Their first game will be on Saturday. Junior Moreno and Yerson Mosquera were out on international duty in respective friendlies. Junior Moreno for Venezuela and Yerson Mosquera for Colombia. And then Nick Hagglund was out with a hamstring injury. He could be back sometime soon, though, as he was listed as questionable. But back to what this team can do. And I talked about, yes, when you have Lucho out there, when you have Brandon Vasquez, and I think especially when you have the defense, I've noted a lot about how this defense can really sit back and almost just not even like abruptly stop, just lull an attack in. And it really showed this weekend when you have CJ Sapong, Lorenzo Insigne, and Fernando Bernardeschi, the latter of those three names, that is the last two names, have won a Euro. That is, and I should also mention this, they started for Italy throughout the Euro tournament. They were not like bench players or guys who just made the 23. They were starters. They were stars in Italy, and they are still stars with the Italian national team. And they were able to come back. Obviously, a lot of them on a little bit of rest since Italy was in Nations League. But ever since that, you look at FC Cincinnati's defense, just really good. And the offense as well. I mean, even without Brandon Vasquez, I mean, you had Yuya Kubo and Dominique Baji up top. And yet the passing remained excellent throughout. And you knew guys had to carry a larger load in this matchup, and they did. You know, when you look at guys like Santi Arias, one of the main starters, but he needed to be a little bit more than just a winger who maybe had a few deliveries. He had to get chances in the box. He had to score, which ended up happening in the game, and he got what was eventually the game winner. And then you look at guys like Alvis Powell and Ray Gaddis, who had to play center back because there was a lack of center backs in this team. And the guy playing center back, Ian Murphy, he's usually a guy that rides on the bench. So again, an FC Cincinnati team that was on their back foot a little bit, but nonetheless, they played amazing. I mean, Yuya Kubo was pressuring, and then Marco Angulo had the assist on the second goal, which was capped off by Lucho Acosta. That is, Yuya Kubo got the pressure to get FC Cincinnati possession back in the box, and then afterwards it was a simple finish from Lucho Acosta, and then Dominic Baji able to run in behind the defense, plays it through, and it's in the net. He got the third. Solid game overall. Again, there were some moments where passing was a little rough, and I would have said, all right, this seems a little stupid at times. But then I would look at Toronto and say, well, they're not playing that good as well. Obviously, they had some problems too. Richie Larea, who was just with Canada in CONCACAF Nations League, he was stuck playing center back in that game. And Larea is a guy that usually plays right wing back or even right midfielder at times. So don't get me wrong, Toronto had their problems as well, but from an attacking standpoint, they had a pretty good mix. And I think especially knowing how teams were hit because of the international break and with Gold Cup starting this weekend, it was something to see with FC Cincinnati. Now, there is a solid use of confidence going into what should be a great game in DC, where they will play this weekend. And again, a little bit of a homecoming for Captain Luciano Acosta. Wayne Rooney, the head coach for DC United, played with Acosta when they were both in the nation's capital. Could be noteworthy, especially knowing how DC may find a way, or rather may be trying to pick at Acosta in ways to stop him. In my opinion, I think Acosta has grown from his time at DC United. He was definitely a good player, but what we're seeing out of his role in Cincinnati is what makes him a captain. What makes him a number 10. And I think in ways like, to quote my dad, it's why the number 10 is the best player on the pitch. Yes, you see the guys like Lionel Messi wears number 10. He may wear it in Miami, who knows? And Acosta, MVP candidate, he wears number 10. Hani Mukhtar for Nashville SC, he wears number 10. But even beyond that, it really shows what this team, or rather what Acosta can do in this situation. I mean, I was watching that Toronto game and I was like, oh boy, this offense is going to look a little different when you don't have pieces like Junior Moreno in the mix. You do have Alvaro Barreal, but no Vasquez up top. Little concerning at times, especially knowing you got Kubo and Baji there. And yet, in an MLS game, they're able to get the results when it matters the most. And again, some of it is Lucho Acosta able to pressure the team, able to get forward and really drive that attack. That being said, if DC United, and Wayne Rooney especially, if he can manage DC United to really pressurize him, get across in those tough situations, and really stop his attack moving forward. That's where maybe DC United starts to take more of a command and more of a noteworthy performance, and it could be even a noteworthy result if they take a point or even three off Cincinnati. I mean, take a look at how St. Louis stopped FC Cincinnati, where they had so many pieces. They were able to control the attack and the command of the match from the get-go. They had so many guys, Joaquini, with Klaus, with Leuven, so many guys that were able to slow down FC Cincinnati where it mattered the most, and ended out in a 5-1 win for St. Louis. You look at DC as well, and how this could affect them going forward. They're ninth in the East overall. If the season ended today, they would get the last playoff spot. Right now, 23 points on the year, right in the middle of the Eastern Conference, maybe on the back end of it. They lost 2-1 to FC Cincinnati earlier this year, and obviously things change from year to year, and especially from week to week as well. Maybe DC got better. I think actually they might stay the same, knowing their recent results. FC Cincinnati, I think, has also stayed the same in terms of commands. Although, in my opinion, I think the defense has become more solid in the sense that they're not allowing those late goals in matches. They're winning those games by multiple goals now. I mean, up until that point where they played DC United back in early May, they actually had never won a game by multiple goals, which I think was very interesting, especially for a team that was leading the MLS in the Supporter Shield race. But here we are. And I think for FC Cincinnati, it is interesting to see the difference between last year and this year in terms of those two matchups, in the sense that when FC Cincinnati played DC United the first time in 2022, that was Pat Noonan's second match as head coach. That was FC Cincinnati's home opener. They ended up losing that 1-0 off a late goal. But then the second time they played them was decision day, and FC Cincinnati won 5-2, and they're on to the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. So automatically you see that shift. And obviously it's almost inevitable in the case of 7 months, you are going to see a shift going forward or going back in terms of how this team plays. So kudos to FC Cincinnati and what they've done. I think they pick up the win. It will be a close one. I think it will be another one decided by a goal, but give me another 2-1 win in favor of the orange and blue. Now on to Columbus. They've also gotten some results, or rather they have gotten a result in each of the last 5 games since that loss to FC Cincinnati during their Hell is Real matchup at TQL Stadium. They got a 1-1 draw against NYCFC, and before that, they were doing pretty well too. I should pull up their schedule here. That's my apologies. But I talked about NYCFC, or rather Columbus Crew facing NYCFC, able to get a result on the road. Unfortunately, they did allow a goal late, which kind of caused them to not get full points. Meanwhile, or I should say, June 10th, Columbus beat Chicago on the road 2-1. You may remember it as Lucas Zelarayan's chip from 60 yards out in stoppage time to win it. How can I not forget that? Bad Mahir. But nonetheless, it is interesting to see what Columbus has done, what they will do going forward, because it does feel like the way this team's playing, yes, they are in a 6th spot, but you could say they just had some tight competition where they can go on the road and get those results. Granted, this play that they have done, and we have seen it last year where Columbus did have a chance to maybe get a win or maybe get a point in matches, but then it causes so much damage late in games that teams get those equalizers, they get those game-winning goals, and Columbus doesn't get enough points. That's what haunted them last year and what ultimately led them to missing the playoffs and Caleb Porter being fired and Wilfred Nancy being brought in so this team can play a full 90 minutes. And when we look at the lineup for what this team did in the Bronx, it does show a little bit. Now, they didn't have Lucas Zelarayan because of international duty. They did not have Gustavo Vallecilla, who was out, but is questionable for the upcoming stretch. He could be playing against Nashville, would really help out their back line. And Deganek, another center back, was out. So again, similar to FC Cincinnati, it was a back line that was very hit or miss potentially. Amundsen and Zawadzki were playing back there, technically as center backs, but knowing how those two have played this year, you would probably guess they could probably motor up. But in that situation, it really just leaves you with one guy back there to defend. Not that good. But I would say that overall, it is interesting to see that team and the service into the area. It led to Christian Ramirez scoring, and especially their wing play. You got Yaboa and Farsi on the wings who have played stellar this year. Of course, I've talked about Yaboa and his impact, where it's like you look at depth players, I think he's one of the guys who could really be there. But again, the defense kind of hurts you where it matters most. Yes, offense can win games, but the defense also matters as well. A lot of service from NYCFC in this match, especially for Pereira and for Thales Magno. And I think if it's not for a little bit of bad finishing on their spot, like you put maybe a higher quality striker in that mix, I think those turn into goals for NYCFC. So in that regards, I think you saw the defense being stretched out a little bit and not being in the best situation overall. Now, on the other side, the offense showed up. Again, great pairing up top between Cucho Hernandez and Christian Ramirez. Ramirez got the goal to give Columbus a 1-0 lead in the 48th minute. He was onside, and it was actually a counterattack against the flow. And again, Alex Matan with a good service into the box. And it's almost what NYCFC was doing in that first half, but they were able to capitalize there. So kudos to Columbus, and you could definitely tell the attack was on later in the match, although it was more towards NYCFC and their chances. Some of it was just Patrick Schulte being a good goalkeeper, although I don't think he really got a good chance to show his caliber in this game. And again, when you look at how this team has played, it is one that when you look at how the season has gone, and when we look at the end of the season in retrospect, we'll say this was not Columbus's best performance, not by a mile, and I would probably agree. And it almost shows on the goal. A little unlucky. It was off a deflection when Columbus was trying to switch the pitch. It unfortunately falls into the hands of Segal. He finishes a pretty simple finish too, almost like Tati Castellanos, who played for them and won NYCFC and MLS Cup a couple years back. And simple finish, Columbus only leaves the Bronx with a point. A big game for them this weekend against Nashville. That one is going to be for free. I have not checked the broadcasting schedule, so maybe we see Jake Zivin and Taylor Twellman coming to town. I haven't really checked MLS's schedule in all, and you've heard me talking about how I want those two, Jake and Taylor, to come. If you don't know them, Jake Zivin and Taylor Twellman, they are your lead commentary crew for Apple TV. Again, a lot of them have done work with other networks, Jake for ESPN and Fox, Taylor for ESPN. And knowing that this is one of the few games out there that is free, you have an opportunity to really show your caliber if you're Columbus and almost get a little bit of revenge, because their game in Nashville was absolutely electric. Nashville ended up winning it 3-1, but I don't think it does justice to how Columbus played. They were the better team in that first half. They were up in that first half 1-0 and took it into the break, but then Nashville and Hani Mukhtar had other plans. And this is where I think it's almost an interesting battle, because I've talked about it when Columbus played FC Cincinnati and Hell is Real. And I think the same goes in this matchup against Nashville, where you have your number 10 against number 10, Lucas Elarayan against Hani Mukhtar, MVP candidate against MVP candidate. Of course, Hani Mukhtar, I think, is a deserving MVP candidate. I think Lucas Elarayan could be in the mix. I think there's just a lot more players that are just overshadowing him right now. But in my opinion, I think he could easily challenge for MVP. But I think the interesting thing, and I think what saved Nashville in that game, is the fact that they had a great back line when it mattered the most. When you have guys like Walker Zimmerman and simply put, just a great back line. Dave Romney, I mean, you can mention a lot of guys. Joe Willis in goal. I mean, he made spectacular saves to keep it the way it was and not let Columbus get in front some more. Instead of it just being 1-0, could have been 2-0 in favor of Columbus. And for all you know, the crew end up getting a result in their trip to the Music City. Instead, Nashville's able to get something on the attack. And again, Hani Mukhtar is playing out of his mind. It almost feels like whenever he gets a touch on the ball, he's going straight towards goal. He's feeding it in for an easy tap in for someone. Maybe it be Leal, maybe it be Schaffelberg up top. I mean, you name it. There's so many great guys on that team that can cause damage for Nashville. And I think the key for Columbus is, especially if Viacia can come back, is how do they manage it? Obviously, I mean, Viacia has been in positions where FC Cincinnati has allowed a lot of goals to Nashville. I'm thinking about that 6-3 result. I think that's what it is, right? 6-3, FC Cincinnati lost to Nashville back in 2021. And it's almost a sense of, does Columbus fall into that same trap from an offensive perspective? Does the crowd help them out? Because Lower.com Field can become a fortress this year. I believe Columbus has only lost once this year at home, and that was to Inter Miami. So it will be an interesting question to see what Columbus can do on the ball, what Nashville can do on the ball. I think we talked about how Columbus has a jaded back line right now. Same could go for Nashville. Walker Zimmerman is on Gold Cup duty. So for all you know, who knows? We could see some great appearances over there for Nashville, some great appearances for Columbus overall. Again, it would be interesting to see what this team can do down the stretch. And I think if Columbus can take a result, especially after what was like a head scratching draw against NYCFC on the road, where it was almost like a little gimme, where it was an international break, maybe you had a chance to really show what you got. Now you do. Now you have a full squad. You got Zelarayan back. Hopefully you've got Viacia, and you can straighten out your defense a little bit so you can't have two guys that are used to scoring. That is Amundsen and Zawadzki back there playing center back. Again, credit to their versatility, but you probably want to play them in a situation, or rather a position, that is more suitable for them. Should be a good game. I think Columbus gets a result out of this. Give me a 2-2 draw, and I think Columbus actually will get the last goal of that match, probably in the last 10-15 minutes or so. All right, so that's it for this week of Buckeye Sports Breakdown. My apologies for not putting out an episode last week. That's on me, but I'm back this week, and you heard a lot of great content about the Reds, Guardians, Crew, and FC Cincinnati, all of whom are playing great right now. For all you know, we could see all four of them in the playoffs come October. I'm Mahir Hassan. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe, and I will see you next week.